I'll get you out of there! Focus on me, you ugly son of a...
On most starships, a guard is invisible. Nobody looks at him twice. Nobody remembers his name. But on one ship, in one forgotten corner of the galaxy, a woman laughed at her guard's face and said 5 words that would echo through history. "You're just my guard." She had no idea what she was standing next to. Sources close to this story, pieced together from surviving fleet logs and eyewitness accounts, suggest that this one moment, this one careless joke, triggered a chain of events that ended with an entire galactic empire wiped from existence. Not damaged, not weakened, erased. And the man who did it, he didn't lead an army. He didn't call for backup. He stood completely alone. Today, we are going to show you 3 things nobody talks about in this story. First, why the most powerful being in the galaxy chose to hide as a simple bodyguard. Second, the real reason the woman's laugh became the spark that ended an empire. And third, the terrifying truth about what happened when the Titan finally understood who it was fighting. This isn't just a battle story. This is a story about being underestimated and what happens when the world finally sees who you really are. If you've ever felt invisible, ignored, or dismissed by people who think they're better than you, this story is for you. Let me show you exactly how this happened. Her name was Serene Voss, and she was born into power. Her family owned 3 trading stations, 2 shipping fleets, and enough political influence to make senators nervous. She grew up believing the galaxy owed her respect. The man walking 2 steps behind her, however, owed nobody anything. His name was Kale. He never talked much. He wore a plain gray uniform with no medals, no rank markers, nothing that told people who he was. Serene had hired him 6 months ago from a small security agency on a forgotten mining planet. He was cheap. He was quiet. And most importantly, he did his job without complaining. That was all she cared about. Serene didn't know that Kale had once commanded fleets. She didn't know he had walked away from wars that changed star systems forever. She didn't know that the calm look on his face wasn't boredom, it was control. Deep, practiced control, built over years of holding back, a power most beings couldn't imagine. To her, he was just the guard, the quiet man who opened doors, carried bags, and stood outside meeting rooms. That morning, Serene was heading to a trade summit on Velmora Station, a massive floating hub in neutral space where different star nations came to negotiate deals. She wore a sharp blue business suit, her hair pulled back, her tablet full of contracts worth more money than most people saw in a lifetime. Kale walked behind her, scanning the crowd out of habit. His eyes moved fast, checking exits, checking faces, checking anything that looked out of place. It wasn't paranoia. It was training so deep it had become instinct. As they entered the station's main hall, a group of businessmen from a rival trading house noticed Serene. They smiled the fake kind of smile people use when they're planning something behind your back. "Miss Voss," one of them said, "traveling with just one guard. Brave of you." Serene laughed, glancing back at Kale like he was a piece of furniture. "Though, don't worry about him. He's just my guard. He barely says 3 words a day." The men chuckled along with her. Kale said nothing. He simply adjusted his stance and kept watching the room. He was used to this. People often judged him by his silence, mistaking it for weakness. He had learned a long time ago that being underestimated was actually useful. It meant people didn't watch him closely. It meant he could see everything, while nobody bothered looking at him at all. But something felt different that day. He noticed a change in the air, a tension he had felt before, the kind that came right before something terrible happened. He scanned the hall again. Guards near the exit stood a little too stiff. A maintenance worker walked a little too slowly. A cargo drone hovered near a support pillar that had no reason to be there. Cale's instincts, the ones he had spent years trying to quiet, began to wake up. Something was wrong. He leaned toward Serene and spoke low. "We should leave." She waved him off without even looking at him. "Relax, Cale. It's just a trade summit." He didn't argue. He never argued. But he moved closer to her side, his eyes locked on the far end of the hall, where a massive transport ship had just docked outside the station's viewing window. It wasn't a trade ship. It was a warship. And not just any warship, it bore the mark of the Draventh Empire, one of the most feared powers in the galaxy. They didn't send warships to trade summits. They sent them to conquer. Alarms started blaring seconds later. Red lights flashed across every wall. The calm business chatter turned into screaming as people realized what was happening. The Draventh Empire had come to take Velmora Station, and everyone inside it. Serene froze, her tablet slipping from her hands. All her wealth, all her family connections, meant nothing in this moment. She looked around for security, for police, for anyone who could help. All she had was Cale. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice shaking for the first time in years. Cale's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did. A calm, quiet fire, like a storm deciding whether to hold back or not. "Stay behind me," he said simply. For the first time, Serene didn't argue. For the first time, she actually listened to her guard. She had no idea that the man standing in front of her wasn't just protecting her. He was about to remind the galaxy why some names were never forgotten. The Draventh Empire didn't waste time with warnings. Their soldiers, tall armored figures with glowing red visors, poured into Velmora Station within minutes. They moved fast, cutting off exits, disabling communication systems, and rounding up anyone who tried to run. This wasn't a random attack. It was planned. Sources within the station's security logs later suggested the Draventh had been watching Velmora for weeks, waiting for the right moment when enough important trade leaders were gathered in one place. Serene and Cale were pushed into a crowd of terrified civilians being herded toward the central hall. Soldiers shouted orders, weapons raised, forcing everyone to kneel. Cale did not kneel. He stood perfectly still, positioned slightly in front of Serene, blocking her from view. A Draventh soldier noticed and marched toward him, weapon raised. "Kneel," the soldier barked, voice distorted through his helmet. Cale didn't move. The soldier raised his weapon higher, ready to strike. Serene grabbed Cale's arm, whispering desperately, "Please, just do what they say." For a moment, Cale hesitated. Then he knelt, not out of fear, but out of patience. He was waiting, watching, learning the layout of the enemy force, counting their numbers, studying their weapons. This was something he had done 1,000 times before, in wars most people in this room couldn't even imagine. The Draventh commander entered the hall a few minutes later. He was massive, nearly 7 feet tall, wearing black armor with a golden emblem on his chest, the mark of General Thren Kordek, one of the Empire's most feared commanders. Kordek walked through the crowd slowly, studying faces, occasionally stopping to inspect someone of importance. He stopped in front of Serene. "Serene Voss," he said, his voice deep and cold. "Your family's trade routes will be very useful to the Empire." Serene's face went pale. "Please, my family will pay anything. Just let these people go." Kordek smiled beneath his helmet. "The Empire doesn't negotiate. It takes." He turned to walk away, then paused, noticing Kale kneeling silently beside her. "Who is this?" Kordek asked. "Just her guard," one of the soldiers answered dismissively. Kordek studied Kale for a moment longer than necessary. Something about the way Kale knelt, too calm, too controlled, bothered him. But he brushed the feeling aside. A single guard was not a threat to an empire. He walked away, ordering his soldier to begin loading prisoners onto transport ships. That was his first mistake. As soldiers grabbed Serene to pull her toward the transport line, Kale finally moved. It happened so fast that most people in the room didn't even register what occurred. 1 second, Kale was kneeling. The next, 2 Draventh soldiers were on the ground, unconscious, their weapons taken before they even realized what happened. Screams erupted. Soldiers turned their weapons toward Kale, opening fire. He was already gone from where he stood. What followed next would later be described by survivors in ways that sounded almost impossible. Kale moved through the soldiers like smoke, disarming, striking, and disabling one after another with terrifying precision. He wasn't just fighting. He was dismantling an entire combat unit with his bare hands. Serene watched in shock, pressed against a wall, unable to look away. The man she had mocked just hours earlier, the man she called just her guard, was moving faster than her eyes could follow. Within 2 minutes, the entire squad guarding the hall was down. Alarms shifted from containment to emergency as reports flooded into General Kordak's command channel. He turned back toward the hall, his confidence cracking for the first time. "Impossible," he muttered, staring at the scene of unconscious soldiers scattered across the floor. Kale stood in the center of the room, breathing steady, his eyes locked on the direction Kordek had walked off to. He looked back at Serene, his voice calm. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, too stunned to speak. "Good," he said. "Stay close. This isn't over." Outside the station, more Draventh warships were arriving, drawn by the emergency signal. The Empire wasn't going to let one guard embarrass them. They were about to bring their full force down on Velmora Station. They had no idea that they were about to face someone the galaxy had once called something far more dangerous than a guard. General Kordak returned with reinforcements, nearly 50 additional soldiers, heavily armored, moving in tight formation through the station's corridors. He wasn't taking any more chances. But something about this situation didn't sit right with him. In all his years serving the Draventh Empire, he had faced rebels, warlords, and even rogue commanders. None of them fought like this. None of them moved like this. He pulled up the station's security footage from earlier in the fight, watching Kale's movements in slow motion. His breath caught in his throat. He recognized the fighting style, the precision, the economy of movement, like every strike was calculated 3 steps ahead. "No," Kordek whispered. "It can't be." He had heard stories, old stories, whispered in military academies as warnings rather than legends. Stories about a soldier who once served during the Kesh Uprising, a war that ended almost overnight after entire enemy battalions vanished without explanation. The survivors of that war spoke of a single figure who moved through enemy lines like a ghost, leaving no evidence of how the battles were actually won. They called him the Silent End. No confirmed images, no name in any official record, just results too devastating to be explained by ordinary soldiers. Kordek had always assumed it was myth, exaggerated stories told to scare new recruits. But watching this footage, doubt crept into his mind. He shook off the thought. Even if this was true, one man, however skilled, could not stop an empire. He ordered his soldiers forward. "Find him. Kill the guard. Take the girl." Meanwhile, Kale led Serene through the station's lower maintenance tunnels, moving with practiced efficiency. He seemed to know the layout of the station better than the station's own security team. "How do you know these tunnels?" Serene asked, struggling to keep up. "I studied the blueprints before we arrived," Kale answered simply. "I always do, in case something like this happens." Serene stared at him, seeing him differently for the first time. "You knew this could happen." "I plan for everything," he said. "It's my job." They reached a maintenance control room, where Kale quickly accessed the station's internal systems, rerouting power and sealing off sections to slow down the advancing soldiers. Serene watched him work, her mind racing. This wasn't the behavior of an ordinary bodyguard. Ordinary bodyguard didn't fight 50 soldiers with their bare hands. They didn't know station blueprints by memory. They didn't move like they had done this 100 times before. "Who are you really?" she finally asked. Kale paused, his hands still on the control panel. For a long moment, he said nothing. "Someone who made a promise a long time ago," he said quietly. "A promise to stop fighting, to live a quiet life." "What changed?" He looked at her, his eyes steady. "They threatened someone I was protecting. That breaks the promise." Before Serene could respond, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the corridor outside. Draventh soldiers were closing in. Kale straightened up, his calm demeanor sharpening into something colder, more focused. "Stay here," he told her. "Lock the door behind me. Don't open it for anyone but me." "Kale, wait." But he was already gone, stepping into the corridor to face 50 armored soldiers alone. Serene locked the door with shaking hands, pressing her ear against it, listening to the chaos that followed. The sound of gunfire, the sound of metal bending, the sound of soldier shouting orders that quickly turned into screams of confusion. And then, silence. She didn't know it yet, but outside that door, the man she once called just a guard was about to remind an entire empire why some names are never forgotten, and why some wars end before they even truly begin. The corridor outside the control room became a battlefield, unlike anything the Draventh soldiers had trained for. Kale moved with a calm that unsettled even the most experienced fighters among them. He didn't shout. He didn't hesitate. He simply moved from one threat to the next, disabling weapons, breaking formations, and turning the Empire's advanced tactics into chaos. Soldiers who had fought in dozens of conquests found themselves overwhelmed by a single man. Reports later gathered from surviving soldiers described him as impossible to predict and always 3 steps ahead. General Kordak watched the growing disaster from a secure command point, his frustration boiling over. He had sent wave after wave of soldiers, and each wave returned defeated or didn't return at all. He made a decision that would change everything. "Activate the Titan," he ordered. The Titan was the Empire's ultimate weapon, a massive combat machine built from captured alien technology, standing nearly 30 feet tall, armored with reinforced plating capable of withstanding heavy artillery. It had ended entire rebellions single-handedly. No planet had ever survived its deployment. The station trembled as the Titan was lowered into the main hall through a reinforced cargo bay. Its red optical sensors scanned the area, locking onto Kale's position through structural sensors. Kale stood at the end of the corridor, watching the massive machine approach. For the first time since the attack began, he took a slow breath. This wasn't a soldier he could simply disarm. This was a machine built to erase resistance completely. Serene, watching through a small maintenance camera feed Kale had shown her earlier, felt her heart drop. "Kale, that thing is going to kill you," she whispered, even though he couldn't hear her. The Titan raised its massive cannon arm, aiming directly at Kale. "Surrender," Kordak's voice echoed through the Titan's speakers. "No one survives the Titan." Kale's eyes narrowed. He thought about the promise he made years ago, to live quietly, to never use his full strength again. He thought about the wars he had ended, the cost of power he carried, and why he had chosen to hide it for so long. Then he thought about Serene, locked behind that door, trusting him for the first time. He made his choice. "I didn't come here to surrender," Kale said quietly. "I came here to end this." The Titan fired. The blast tore through the corridor, sending debris flying in every direction. For a moment, everything went silent, smoke filling the hallway. Kordak smiled beneath his helmet, certain the fight was over. But as the smoke cleared, Kale was still standing, unharmed, having redirected the blast's impact, using a technique so precise it defied normal combat physics. His gray uniform was torn, revealing faint glowing markings along his arms, markings that hadn't been visible before. Kordak's confidence shattered. "That's not possible," he stammered. Kale took a step forward, then another, his pace steady, unstoppable. "You woke something you shouldn't have," Kale said, his voice carrying a weight that made even the Titan's automated systems hesitate for a fraction of a second. What happened next would become the reason this story is still whispered about across star systems today. Part 5, final part. The Titan fired again, faster this time, unleashing a barrage meant to end the fight in seconds. Kale moved. Witnesses who later reviewed the station's damaged security footage described his movements as impossible, beyond normal human capability, and terrifyingly precise. He closed the distance to the Titan in the blink of an eye, striking key points along its armored frame with pinpoint accuracy, joints, power conduits, structural weak points. He seemed to know without ever having studied the machine's design. The Titan staggered. Kordak, watching from his command post, could hardly process what he was seeing. His Empire's ultimate weapon, a machine that had crushed rebellions across dozens of worlds, was being dismantled by a single man with his bare hands. "Fall back," Kordak screamed into his comm system. "Fall back. Now." It was too late. Kale delivered one final strike, driving straight into the Titan's core power chamber. The massive machine shuddered violently before collapsing, sparks and smoke pouring from its shattered frame. Silence fell over the station. Kordek stood frozen at his command console, watching the remains of his empire's greatest weapon lying defeated. Around him, his surviving soldiers stared in disbelief, radios crackling with panicked reports from every corner of the station. Kale walked slowly through the wreckage, approaching Kordak's command room. The general, for the first time in his long military career, felt real fear. "Who are you?" Kordek asked, his voice shaking. Kale studied him for a long moment. "Someone who used to end wars before they started," he said quietly. "You should have left this station alone." Kordek reached for a hidden weapon, a last desperate attempt. Kale was faster. Within seconds, the general was disarmed and restrained, his empire's assault completely broken. Word spread quickly through Draventh command channels. Without their general, without their Titan, and with their assault force scattered and defeated, the remaining warships retreated from Velmora Station, unwilling to risk further engagement against an enemy they couldn't understand. The Draventh Empire's attempt to seize Velmora Station had failed, not because of a rival army, not because of a defense fleet, but because of one man who chose, for one day, to stop hiding who he really was. Serene finally emerged from the control room, stepping carefully over debris, her eyes wide as she took in the destruction around her. She found Kale standing quietly amid the wreckage, his expression calm once again, as if the storm inside him had settled. "You erased them," she whispered. "All of them. Alone." Kale turned to her, his eyes softer now. "I told you. I planned for everything." Serene looked at him differently now, not as just her guard, but as someone whose true strength she would never fully understand. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For everything." Kale simply nodded, adjusting his torn uniform as if nothing unusual had happened at all. As rescue ships began arriving to help survivors, whispers spread quickly through the crowd, whispers about the quiet guard who had stopped an empire alone. Some called it luck. Others called it a miracle. But those who truly understood what happened that day knew better. They had just witnessed the return of a legend the galaxy thought had disappeared forever. Here's the twist most people miss when they hear this story. Kale didn't fight to prove his strength. He fought because he had spent years hiding from it, afraid of what it meant to be that powerful. The real courage in this story wasn't defeating an empire, it was choosing, after years of silence, to step forward when someone needed him. Remember how this all started. A careless laugh. 5 simple words. "You're just my guard." Those words weren't wrong because Kale was powerful. They were wrong because they revealed how easily we overlook the people quietly protecting us every single day. Sources close to Velmora Station later confirmed that Serene changed how she treated everyone working for her family after that day. A small but meaningful shift that rippled through her entire organization. As for Kale, he reportedly disappeared shortly after, leaving no trace, just like the old stories always said he would. But galaxies remember. And somewhere, in another forgotten corner of space, another empire may be planning something dangerous, unaware that a quiet guard nearby might be more than they ever imagined. If this opened your eyes to how easily we misjudge the people around us, wait until you hear what happens in the next chapter of this universe, because this was only the beginning of a much bigger story. So let's bring this all together. A woman underestimated her guard. That guard turned out to be one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy. And in less than one day, he single-handedly stopped an empire from conquering an entire space station. The biggest lesson here isn't about power. It's about perception. The people we overlook most often carry stories, strength, and depth we never bother to notice. If this story gave you chills, made you feel something, or reminded you never to judge someone too quickly, that's exactly why we make these videos. If you enjoyed this HFY Sci-Fi story, do me a quick favor. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because we upload brand new HFY stories every single week, packed with hidden power reveals, epic space battles, and unforgettable characters just like Kale. And if you want more stories like this one, stories about quiet heroes, hidden strength, and galaxies at war, check out our next video linked right here on screen. It continues in the same universe. And trust me, it gets even bigger. Drop a comment below and let me know. What part of this story surprised you the most? Was it the Titan? The twist about Kale's past? Or the moment Saren finally understood who he really was? Your comments help this channel grow, and I read every single one. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. Stories like this take real time and effort to build, and you being here means everything. See you in the next story.